What's up everybody, Rob here. So this is a completely off-the-cuff and unscripted video, and it is a reply to Kings and Generals. Now, Kings and Generals is a fantastic channel. If you haven't checked them out, please do it. They are fantastic. You'll learn a lot from them. Very high quality. I've followed them for years, and I love it. Now, specifically though, I am going to be responding to a video that came out a couple days ago about Middle Ages, and specifically why were armies in the Middle Ages so small, especially compared to their ancient and early modern counterparts. Now, I have nothing against what they were saying specifically. The video, of course, in question is in the description box, so by all means, check that out. So what they do say, I agree with totally, and I have nothing really to say about those factors specifically. What I'm doing here is just leapfrogging off of what they said and adding just one more factor, or well, maybe a couple more factors. Like I said, this is unscripted, but something that wasn't brought up and I just figured I'd address. So it's not really a reply or response. It's just more of an add-on to what they said. And it has to do with castles and opportunity cost in economics. And that is why armies were so small. So during the Middle Ages, there was a massive influx in the building of fortifications, specifically castles. Now, fortifications are nothing new. They've been built in, well, pretty much since the beginning of civilization. One of the earliest walled settlements, I believe, was Jericho, which was somewhere around 8,000 BC, thereabouts. I could be wrong about that, but I don't care enough to look it up. But in any case, since there's been civilization, even in prehistory, there's castles and not castles, but there have been fortifications, and they were used right up until, well, pretty much the 17th or 18th century, where artillery can just blast them to pieces. But that's not the point. The point is, fortifications are nothing new around settlements. But during the Middle Ages, in Western Europe, there was an influx of standalone fortifications. Now, these also have existed, but never on this scale. And basically, because of the nature of feudalism, virtually every lord either had a castle or he wanted a castle. And so as feudalism is a very decentralized system, every lord of a particular fief, there were quite a lot of them, and they would want their own castle. And so they would build their own castles. And as a result, though, they had their own fortifications, but because of the nature of the medieval economy, which was extremely sluggish, they had to make a choice, and this is where opportunity cost comes in, between having their own fortifications as a base of operations for their governance over their fiefs, or they can have a large standing army, and they almost universally went with the castles. And what I mean by opportunity cost is, opportunity cost is an economic concept. It simply means that there are a limited amount of resources, and if a resource is used for one thing, it cannot be used for something else. So right now, I am making this video, and the time and energy and effort that I'm putting into this video means I'm not putting effort, time, or energy into something else. I'm not reading, I'm not cooking, I'm not exercising, I am not talking to random strangers, I don't know, whatever else. Basically, the opportunity cost of this video was me not doing something else. You can say this about money. If you spend money on one thing, you can't spend it on something else. If you use steel for skyscrapers, you can't use it to make cars. It just very simple concept. Opportunity cost means you put resources towards one thing, you can't put it towards something else. So these lords and other nobility who built these castles didn't have a large economic base to work with, and what they did have, they put it towards castle design, or castle building rather, and because they put it towards castle building, they couldn't put it towards the building of a large army. Because if they did, they wouldn't have the money to build the castles. Now, castles, as you can imagine, are extremely expensive. These things take years, if not decades, to build. It requires near constant maintenance, otherwise they're just going to fall apart over time. There's also continual additions being added onto it, new defensive features. They can be expanded if necessary. New towers can go up. The walls can be dealt with. Basically, it requires a lot of capital and a lot of resources, manpower, in order to build. And because they had such a sluggish economic base with which to work. This was, again, an era, they first off were dealing with relatively small populations on relatively small pieces of land. I'm talking like on national scales. They didn't have a lot of money to go around, and they didn't have a lot of manpower to go around. So they had to make that choice, and they made castles. And because of this, they couldn't have large armies. But it actually did work out for them, because castles really meant that you didn't need a large army, because, well, a castle garrison was actually pretty tiny. It was only about 15, 20, 30 people, depending. A few dozen, honestly, less than 100 people in a castle. And that's even 100, it's actually sometimes quite a lot. But that's all you really needed, because, for example, because you can use the castle as a base of operations through which to project your power out. So, for example, when Edward I conquered Wales, he set up a string of castles around the country, and with these relatively small garrisons, he was able to send out people, or the lords that he put in charge. It's feudalism, you know what I'm trying to say here. In any case, they were able to go out, they were able to tax the local countryside, they were able to keep the peasants in line, and if the peasants got a little uppity, you can just fall back to the castle, and an army of like 40 or 50 guys, a garrison of 40 or 50 guys can hold hundreds, if not thousands of attackers. So really, it's a massive force multiplier. So you had to make this choice, and they chose the fortification for its utility. And it actually, ultimately, though, because you had these castles, instead of a large army, it actually helped their economics in the long term. See, because on a feudal fief, an area of land controlled by a lord, he was the government, say, and he received a portion of whatever was produced by the local populace. Now, if you have a large army, which you have to draw from the local populace, who are you drawing from? Well, that would be military-aged men. We'll say roughly 15 through 50, give or take. Usually younger than 50, but you know what I'm generally, right? Those are the military-aged men. Who are the most economically productive people in an era before automation or machinery or anything like that? Basically, when manual labor, if you want like to cut down a tree, here's an axe, go cut down that tree. You want to plow a field, okay, here's a plow, go plow. Yes, you have an ox, but you're manually doing this stuff. Who are the most economically productive people? Young men aged 15 through 50, military-aged people. So if you put those people in your army, guess who's not paying tax? Guess who you have to now pay taxes to? Or, pay taxes towards paying. Well, that would be the army, okay? Which means that these guys are not being economically viable. They're actually a drain on your resources. So in a way, castles design, it meant that they couldn't create large armies because of the opportunity cost. But at the same time, though, it actually, once the castles were completed, meant that those men who would be in the army are now freed up to be more economically productive. So it's kind of a weird catch-22. Right? Now, as the Middle Ages drew to a close and was replaced by the early modern era, the state became more centralized. A lot of times castles were simply destroyed, or they were not allowed to be built. Castles were restricted in their usage, and things became more centralized. And one of the reasons why this came into being is the rise of there's a lot involved with this, but one of the factors was the rise of what we would today consider free market capitalism, and the rise of a middle class, which means there was this larger tax base, and they were all paying it to a centralized power rather than a local petty fief, which means that you can actually afford, because they were getting this influx of cash coming in, you can afford to, with this extended tax base, you can afford to take men out of society, make them not economically productive. Actually, being a large army is actually an economic drain on a society, for you have to pay them, and they're not being economically productive. Therefore, the economy had to progress to the point where it was in possession of a large enough tax base to be able to do this, to be able to afford this drain on society. So, that's a whole different topic right there. But basically, I just wanted to bring up this idea of opportunity cost and castle design. And because everybody had castles, or not everybody, but, every lord had and every little petty fief had a castle. Well, that meant that those resources, that money, time, energy, was not spent on maintaining and training an army. And they couldn't anyway, but it actually worked out in their favor because now you freed up men to be economically viable. So just a couple quick thoughts there. Again, like I've said, I am writing for another channel, a rival to Kings and Generals. But in any case, I haven't been putting out videos, but I will be continuing to do these whenever I have an opportunity. Real quick one here, about 10 minutes. That's actually pretty fast for me. But in any case, yeah, just some thoughts I figured I'd share with all of you guys, and that's pretty much it. Right. Have a good day. Or don't have a good day, you're adults. Have any kind of day you want. See you all later.